up to about 15. Hello, everybody. Feel free to share who's here. Throw some early questions in the comments. We'll get started, I'd say, in about 5 or 6 minutes here. Just want to give everyone a chance. I know going between session to session, even though it seems really easy, it still takes time. We have to get up, get some water, something to drink. So we'll kick off in a few. Feel free to throw some questions in chat or just let us know who's here. I wish I had background music right about now, actually.
I've looked into that.
Picturing Celine Dion.
I've still tried. I've seen it done once, like really well, and I need to get like what that background music was. They did a perfect fade in and fade out for a virtual conference.
Nice.
And I think I think I mean, I know him. He doesn't get send him a text. I think he like literally used Spotify. But it was so nice and slick.
Yeah. I haven't figured out how to pipe music in, but I could definitely, so I'm running a 2-system setup right now. I could definitely pump it into the background. Hey, Jaffe, Zach, Dan, good to see you. I love Dan's LinkedIn, Benevolent Overlord. Gracia, I'm going to hold on.
Dan was
people on screen just yet until I'm going to have a chance to ask the panelists some questions. Then after that, I'll start bringing people on screen as it makes sense. So if you're okay with holding off a little bit. Cool.
Last time I saw Dan was at Hell's Kitchen, an event
that he
hosted for people Sunday, and handing out drink tickets to everybody. And who would have thought you could have a good time on a Sunday evening? And then the world shut down. So I haven't seen him since.
Yeah, well, one of the things you'll hear me say is I think the Twin City startup team has done a very good job of continuing the engagement. Hey, Nikolai, thanks for joining, man. Done a very good job of not only keeping the panels alive, but also the interactivity. And so Michael and I had the benefit of using Hopin during beta. It's pretty smooth for all intents and purposes, but it's never going to be the in-person thing ever again. Well, hopefully someday. But I think this is a really good second. And if not, maybe we wouldn't have been able to get YiDing coming in from Boston. It's just a good fortune. So we'll get about 2 more minutes and then we'll kick off. Anyone else who wants to say hi in chat, feel free. You've got a panel of AI experts, so start getting your questions ready. So much cool stuff. I'm also going to try to keep track of 3 screens. So as questions pop up, I'll try to catch them in chat. I'll try to catch if somebody wants to join live, but I'm going to take a page out of Nikolai's book since he said he's here. I'm going to steal the first half of this for myself. Hey, Wes, to ask the questions that we've sort of been talking about. I've had a chance to chat with all 3 of you, and then I will open it up for the audience to sort of throw in their 2 cents on what they want to know about AI, where it's placed in the business, how they can leverage it, stuff like that. Cool. Let's close that up now. Cool. So why don't we go ahead and get kicked off? It's about 5 minutes. I think people will keep coming and going as things go along. So you'll see that number tick up, tick down. Hopefully some people will jump in through questions. But while I have you guys, first and foremost, I want to kick off by thanking everyone for joining today. It's probably a first for all of us, panelists and viewers, in terms of being on the Hopin platform. So I was just saying, I think the Twin City Startup team has done a very good job of keeping the engagement while also giving us an opportunity to have conversations like this. So for viewers, there is a chat panel on the far right over here. So if you have questions, you can throw those in there as we go along, and we will capture those towards the end. Otherwise, the other way we can do this, at the very top of the screen, there's something that says share audio and video. Once you do that, one of us can actually bring you into the room so you can ask your questions live in person on screen. So to the origin of the panel, it's really meant to demystify what it is that artificial intelligence is, what it's doing, where it's being implemented in the workplace, and what it's being implemented for. And I think we have a good cross-section of different applications of the artificial intelligence space. There's sort of a lot of mystery and mystique around what AI is and how it's actually being used. So I want to pull together this panel, I should say we all want to pull together this panel of experts to look at how AI actually improves business outcomes and augments the human versus some of that scary stuff you see in TV where robots become sentient and take over the world, that kind of thing. Because the reality really is, at its core, AI is this very simple process that automates sort of mundane human tasks, or takes millions of data points and makes some sense out of it so that we can, as humans, apply our domain knowledge to those insights, come up with better decisions and better outcomes. And we've all talked in this panel about how it's really less artificial intelligence and more augmented, where you look at AI plus humans and you end up with a better outcome. So hence the name of the panel today, Improving Business Outcomes. I can't tell you how many sort of TED Talks I've been on of late and conferences I've been at where people talk about, as they implement AI, you've got people who were responsible for these mundane processes being very appreciative of their day being cleared up so they can do what they were always meant to do, which is meaningful, creative work. So to that, I've seen a lot of these sessions go very quickly today already, and I know this may be a first session for everybody here. I'm going to shut up and introduce the panel at this point. Actually, I'm going to let them introduce themselves, starting with YiDing from Virata Health, and then Gary from 2VO, and then Brian from Ambient Intelligence, and then my partner, Michael, from Click360. If that's the order I'm going to keep going in. So if that works for you guys, YiDing, do you want to kick it off? Sort of who you are, what's the business, what's your role?
Yeah, sounds great. Hi, everyone. Very excited to be here. Thank you, everyone, for joining. My name is YiDing Yu, Chief Medical Officer at Virata. Virata is a AI company that's solving prior authorizations for both providers and payers. And my role as Chief Medical Officer is I run client success as well as marketing for the company.
Very cool. Gary, same question.
Hi, everybody. Stockert, I'm the president at 2VO. We are also an AI platform. That's why we've joined today. We do trigger intelligence as kind of a simple way to explain it, or help automate marketing processes to create better outcomes for businesses. I'm in charge of the sales and account services part of our business, and thanks everybody for joining.
Very cool. Brian?
Hi, I'm Brian Bradley Johnson, the founder and CEO of Ambient Intelligence. We're a healthcare informatics platform built on the Google Healthcare Cloud. And so based on that foundation we've built, go for specialty clinician workflows and applications.
Awesome. Michael, jump in. You are on mute somehow. Go ahead and fix that. We'll hear from you shortly.
Off to a good start. So Michael Weber, I work with Mike at Click360. I'm the founder, and so what that means is essentially I wear many hats. Some of them fit well, some of them don't. But I come from primarily the technical background. Click360 is an analytical platform, typically for sales and marketing, for B2B businesses and kind of big ticket B2C efforts. And what we essentially do is we track everything that happens, and we find patterns of behavior and figure out what those patterns mean, how best to engage folks.
Perfect. And to that, I am Mike Lewis, the co-founder of Click360, of which Michael just told you about. We talk a lot about optimizing the customer journey by using AI as just a means to recognize behaviors in terms of what's most valuable to the customer journey. So to kick off, like I said, I have about 4 to 5 questions for the panelists based on their expertises in business cases. Talk about some of why the business was created, the key value propositions, what are some of the industry struggles, et cetera. And then given the nature of those businesses, where do people win? So we like to talk about when the hospital wins, the patient wins. When the business wins, the employee wins. When marketing wins, sales wins. So we look at this dual value proposition where it's not just AI replace human, better outcome. It's actually AI plus human creates a better decision process and allows humans to do what we were meant to do, which is be creative problem solvers. So I'm going to kick off with the first questions. I like to call this part the current state. So what are the businesses doing today to solve for the problem that your business is addressing? So YiDing, as I promised, starting with you, as one of the largest and fastest growing companies on the panel, can you talk about the prior authorization process, what it is, how the hospitals are solving for it, why that's messy, and so why Virata coming in makes that process a lot better and what the hospital wins?
Yeah, great question, Mike. I think many of us might have come across prior authorizations just as in our own experience as a patient or for maybe a loved one. And prior authorization is pretty much like a mother may I situation where your insurance company says, well, your doctor and you might be interested in getting procedure, but we've got to make sure that it meets medical necessity, that it's not something like frivolous or wasteful. And I think certainly most of us go into thinking like, I don't go to the doctor to be frivolous, but certainly the insurance company is interested in making sure that your membership dollars are spent well, but also that we are able to get you the care that you need. And so there's a real tension here of saying, let's say I want an MRI of my knee because I've had a lot of pain. Is this really the most cost-effective way of doing it? And so prior authorization was created by the health insurance industry to be almost like a gatekeeping or quality control metric. And what it does today, or the requirements today, are that your doctors have to have dedicated staff members that fax pages and pages of clinical documentation that are then reviewed manually by nurses at the health plan. And this happens millions of times a day. It's all entirely manual, and the entire process to just even get the first response can take up to 2 weeks. So that means that you've seen your doctor, you have pain in your knee, and your doctor says, let's get an MRI, but it might take the insurance company more than 2 weeks to just get the initial response. And if they deny it, you'll have to appeal it, and that could even take any longer. Today, it's estimated that the cost of just doing this is about $31 billion in the healthcare system, which is a lot of money, but I think the most telling statistic is actually that 60% of all doctors have a dedicated staff member, like a person that they hired in their office whose only responsibility is to do prior auth. So that is like paperwork that's taken up a whole human workload, and that's the problem we're solving today.
Yeah, I love it. And I'm sure that person was not hired to do paperwork. And that's one of those things we talk about where we remove the mundane and let that person be successful. Gary, similar question. Can we talk about trigger-based marketing and how it is that, companies currently decide what to serve in the moment in terms of surprise and delight, in terms of how you see when it makes sense to serve what I love your tagline, a moment that matters. Like how do you use AI to recognize when a business can serve an offer that makes a difference?
Yeah, there's a bit to unpack there, but I think kind of at a high level, I really like to lay out that there is a journey here for all marketers to go through, and that we help them get through that journey. And we think about it a lot as moving from what traditional marketers are used to, we refer to as batch and blast, right? You find a list of customers, you target them with messaging, and then you analyze the results. This process is extremely manual and very slow, and really bogs down the process. And so in our case, we're trying to move past that to more of an advanced segmentation, and then ideally trigger-based. And for us, trigger-based really just means at a customer level, or literally one-to-one. And so matching up an offer, or matching up content, or maybe a channel to try to figure out how to produce the best desired outcomes. And so when we say presenting stimulus at a customer level, that means literally when Mike Lewis is on my website or using my application, we want to tailor everything specifically to him and to his individual data profile. And that's what we really think of as trigger-based. And trigger-based is not just personalization, it's actually personalization based on an event that happens along a digital micro journey. I know that's a little buzzwordy, but when you think about a digital customer journey that's happening, we all sort of do things in different types of patterns. And so, having a machine learning algorithm like Tuvio to help digest and consume that low level, as we call it, transactional data that for many organizations is really difficult to harvest the value from today. Yeah. Tuvio automates that process. It simplifies that process and then gives the marketer that ability, as you mentioned earlier, Mike, to really focus on iteration and how do we progress a program or a platform. The biggest thing I think we're trying to help solve for marketers with the concept of human domain expertise plus artificial intelligence is about improving performance of marketing stimulus. It's ultimately what it's at. And when we see things, YiDing, you mentioned some great statistics. I think for us, we see the bar is extremely low in our space today. And so we see marketing programs performing at 6 to 8 to 10 times better than what we refer to as random. And now don't take that word random as a slap in the face. Not meant to be that. It's just the code that we really put around traditional marketing, which means I'm using really experience, instinct, and then analytics that I currently have available to me to make decisions about what programs to set up and why. Yeah. So ultimately, we just think the best performance is by removing and allowing you to both predict based on pattern recognition and then present stimulus in real time, in that moment that matters along that journey.
Yeah, super cool. And I mean, we've talked about that before, that idea of latency, where if you don't catch that moment in the moment is gone. And so just, I love what'd you call it? The batch and,
Batch and blast.
Yep.
Yep.
We used to call it the spray and pray. I hope somebody comes back from this. And once they come back, I will do it again. I will spray and pray with something else and hope that more people come back from that. So very cool. All right, Brian, on to you. So I say sort of tongue in cheek, what you're doing is literally sometimes a matter of life and death. Can you talk about the current process in hospitals and how they address patient care and sort of what they're doing right now? For example, how many patients a nurse has to deal with and how they deal with that versus where you're looking to go with ambient intelligence?
Sure. Let's take like long-term care, for instance. There's often a ratio of nurses to patients that's 10-to-1 or 20-to-1 often. So that's, nurses are responsible for, 10 to 20 patients. And current standard is that they have sort of a manual trigger, like a call light or something, that they're, trying to get a hold of someone to help them in need. Of course, the problem is that, with cognitive decline, you might not always remember to do so, or you might be out of reach of that physical thing.
Right.
So ambient intelligence is really trying to automate that process of data collection for real-time monitoring and real automatic notification, and remove as much of the burden off of the nurses as they currently have to deal with, and then improving that data collection for patients as automatic. They don't have to think about anything. Parts of our technology, they don't have to wear anything at all. And of course, you get different data types of sets as opposed to like ambient, as opposed to on body.
Right.
So we've got an approach of triangulating both of those two, and it's really patient and nurse centric types of technology. There's AI used in data mining and EMRs and some other like insurance claims or whatever. Lots of interesting areas. Our particular area that we're been most focused on is things that will directly affect the patients and nurses and improve that relationship between the two.
Yeah, to me, what you're doing is a no-brainer, and we'll get to sort of that dual value proposition again. But when the hospital wins, the nurse wins. When the nurse wins, the patient wins. When the patient wins, life is just better. So that's what I love about what you're doing. And then, Michael, last but not least, obviously, I'm a little bit more familiar with Click 360. Can you chat a bit about how companies are managing the process of understanding the customer journey right now, and then prioritizing activity, as well as how they decide to allocate sales and marketing resources?
Sure, and some of this comes off of what Gary had said of what kind of the current state of marketing technology in this area is. There's a lot of kind of rules-based approach where people will say if they are doing any kind of automated personalization, they'll come up with a series of rules and say, if this, then that, if this, then that. And it's a really hard way to actually optimize a customer journey for a complex sales cycle. And so one of the things that we do is to say, we're going to collect pretty much all the data and look at it and look at everybody at this company, see what they're doing. And we're going to look at the behavior specifically and try to find the patterns of that. The way that I think it maybe makes most sense from an AI point of view is to say that we want to understand what people are saying by their actions. And so we apply the same kind of ideas of natural language processing, where we say, we look at all of the words in, say, a book or a large series, a corpus of text, and we're going to see what pattern of words means what. We're basically going to try to learn and derive those patterns from it. That way, everybody who comes into, say, your website or your sales funnel otherwise, they do a pattern, a series of actions on their words, and they're literally saying something to you. And so it's that idea of saying, can we move from where I need to impose my views of what the customer journey is, to see it, to learn it, and then, very importantly, as things change, to continuously learn and, of course, be able to prove out that what we're doing is actually valuable. So I think that's a little bit on the customer journey side of things. We're also trying to personalize each person's path based on what we know as a whole, and then where they are in the customer journey as well. Beyond that, we do a amount on kind of literally mapping it and showing it in all the kind of end-to-end view as well.
Yeah, I mean, to both what you and Gary said, it's incredibly important to see the customer journey, to understand what it means. And then, so we'll get into this in the next question of the value of the solve. Once you see and recognize what that is, how do you start to create value? So YiDing, I come back to you and say, from my conversations with Wes, when I was watching now, I've gotten to know the team pretty well and solve a little bit. Can we talk about how the process has improved from both the hospital's point of view on things like paperwork, but you touched on this a little bit. Also, the patients win when the hospital is more efficient and effective in terms of, delivering point of care service.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a couple of things that
You might be muted.
Are you able to hear me? Mike, are you able to
We
hear
got
me?
you.
Okay, perfect. So there's a couple ways that makes this a really important challenge to solve, and we heard about why does it take so long. So what we said, like, let's handle all the complexity with AI. And so the reason why it's so time consuming today is because there are hundreds of thousands of payer rules out there. And then there are all types of scenarios that happen for a patient. So, a human has to say, well, what happens if you're on a Silver Blue Cross of Minnesota plan for this specific procedure, and then look through the chart. AI can handle hundreds of thousands, millions of rules, read through tons of clinical data and say, aha, this is the best match for you. Let me suggest that. I'm a physician. Our founder is a physician, and we actually show the user our work. And we don't just like magically, wave our hands and say, like, trust us. We show them which documents we recommend. We show them the rules, and we let the human make the final call if they need to. And oftentimes I say it's like one of our founders was the original inventor of Google Maps. And when he built Google Maps, I think the beauty of what we use in Google Maps, I was just using it on Labor Day, is that Google Maps doesn't tell you that there's an 80% chance if you took this route and a 20% if you took the other one, right? It says turn right, but also there are 2 other routes and they're 12 minutes longer. And then one has toll. You get to make a choice on what you want to do. And that's really Virata's approach to this. We've given the user, we've compiled tons of information, made the choice far more simple, and said, what would you like to do for it? And the financial result, or the outcome result for the provider, has been that we've shaved out about 80% of the time it takes to do this work. And so for one of our hospitals, it was taking them 11 days to actually schedule a patient because of prior authorizations. Today, that's 2.5 days. And so for the patient, that means they got that care, like, 8-9 days faster. But for a provider, you think about in the market where they're trying to compete, it means they're able to accommodate that last minute patient or a last minute cancellation. They can actually use that appointment and give it to somebody else. Whereas before, you had a lot of providers who had capacity but couldn't accommodate a new patient. So we're not only driving better patient satisfaction and better patient care, but we're improving the efficiency of the entire system by using the existing capacity at a higher scale. I think that's been a huge win for everybody involved.
I think that piece right there is really cool. Just figuring out where capacity is and using it optimally. I mean, for all intents and purposes, that's kind of what like a crowdsourced vehicle platform is doing, right? It's just taking demand and supply and matching them up. Which is very cool. And Gary, I kind of already asked you part of this question, but I want to dive deeper a little bit into. It looks like we lost Brian for a second. So you talked about the capture of it and the serve of it. What does the marketer get back in terms of time, effort, insight? And then is it also fair to say the customer journey actually improves when you can actually monetize those moments that matter?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think when you talk about the marketer's time, there's a lot of gains certainly by bringing an AI platform in. In particular, we talked a little bit about the pattern recognition and behavioral prediction, right? Which is your algorithm and your machine learning engine put together. The biggest pain point is usually, as I talked a little bit about earlier, is insight latency. Is that many times we have so much diversity, and those are the right types of clients for Tuvio, where there's so much diversity in their offering, be it a large SKU count, a ton of different types of customers. So we ask our clients, how many types of customers do you think you have? Is it 5? Is it 10? Is it 50? and for that type of diversity, you really need an artificial intelligence platform to speed up iteration, as we talked about before. And so that's a big part of what you gain as a marketer. But I think really the biggest component is that ability to create and craft messaging and marketing that is really aimed to serve one-to-one. There's this adage from a gentleman named Tillman Fertitta, who says there's really, in retail in particular, you think about restaurants as a great example, there can be no such thing as a spare customer. You have to treat every individual customer like they're your only customer. And doing that at scale is borderline impossible. And so when you think about that, for especially a larger scale organization or even a small one, how do you really do a good job of personalization and create that one-to-one relationship? Well, you have to understand that customer data profile. And moreover than that, Mike, you have to be able to act on their data profile in the moment that matters to them. And so what we find is that not only do you speed up with your ability to iterate, so thus removing time on things like querying a database, analyzing past performance, because you have an AI platform that's crunching that data in real time and delivering insights and turning them into action, is really the whole core here, as opposed to just traditional analytics, which I love and I came from, and why I moved into AI was my passion for analytics. But analytics stops at the insight. It doesn't necessarily tell you what to do or why the insight is meaningful or valuable to an organization. So having that platform underneath your programs can be really effective to help with some of those key gains. So time certainly, but performance absolutely.
Yep.
And then, as you love to say, surprise and delight, right? Find moments to give a customer an or a journey that they weren't expecting in a positive way. And there's a fine line. I don't want to get too carried away on this. We've got more to discuss today, but there's a fine line between being helpful and being creepy. And so you really have to understand that difference in how you address your programs and how you deliver that content and that stimulus.
Well said. I mean, I didn't go that far in the opening, but so a lot of these TED Talks talk about how we look at AI, AI becomes creepy, tracks your information, becomes self-aware, and then takes over the world. And, what you're talking about right now, and YiDing touched on, and Michael and Brian, is improve processes, crunch numbers, free up time, take sort of, hand-based, tedious, time-intensive processes and taking them away from humans, and then allowing the human to use the insight created to make a decision based on. Totally agree. Creepy AI. All right. On that note, Brian, are you back? Can we hear you?
I'm back. Yeah.
Okay. Perfect. So the more we talk about the ambient intelligence solve, and how it gets more powerful, sort of as we have more data, which again is true for all the AI platforms. Can you chat about what you're solving for, and then so we talk about value proposition. What does that do for the nurse, or what does that do for the hospital? And ultimately the patient. So the value of you freeing them up from trying to guess where to go next, or which patient to see, or what's going to happen next.
Sure, good question. It primarily is a health informatics platform. And so just doing the fundamentals, even before you do any AI, is very necessary. And so just like the automatic collection of data, ingestion, storage, data visualization are just like basic things. Before we get into any predictive models, we want to do those things.
Yeah.
Because especially like long-term care facilities or other organizations, as other companies hit the hockey stick of exponential advances like SpaceX or something, they're going to get to Mars, and then we're going to have facilities here that are still faxing things and printing off rosters. And that is, that would be a very weird world to live in. And it's happening. And the companies that see the advantages of having, sort of predictive models running behind all their analytics and everything, most companies don't have that at all, especially in healthcare. And so just trying to bridge the gap of where they are and get them some basic functionality. So there was a new piece of legislation one of our advisors, Frank Kiesner, had sent that it's very interesting because it's the Medicare coverage of innovative technology, CMS 3372, which is going to incentivize for cutting edge technology in, let's see here, from Centers of Medicaid and Medicare Services. So that's going to be potentially what the Affordable Cares Act did for implementing EMRs. We'll see. I haven't seen much about what's actually going to be in that bill or what's covered or when it's going to start.
Mhm.
But you really need something, some kind of federal thing to incentivize behaviors, and then you get, people at HIMSS that 40, 50,000 people analyze a particular piece of legislation and realize that there's, probably 50 or $100 billion available in what was just legislated. And then you can, over the course of the next few years, you'll have people that come up with solutions. But just doing, again, like the basic for delivering data to nurses. I mean,
Yeah.
it doesn't really take it's an infrastructure upon an infrastructure. It took Google to build that for us to be able to transport a single piece of data, PHI data, from point A to point B. But a lot of it is just making sure the fundamentals are done correctly. So most of this year has been working with an architect and our engineers just to make sure that this is something that's scalable. It's going to actually work. It's going to fit in the nurse workflow. It's going to be interoperable with the EMRs. It's like the basic things that, before you get so far ahead where we're talking about, sentient types of technology, which I think is not something to dismiss. I think you have to be very, very vigilant on where things could go if the logical progression continues at this rate, or if your foundation of ethics doesn't surpass what the current laws are. If all you're trying to do is go to the point of where it's regulated, you really have to, I think, go above and beyond and take into consideration things that you're getting in an insight in your own business, because you're sitting with your company for years or something, and you're already going to know where things could be in 2, 3, 4, 5 years. And someone who hasn't put the time in is not going to have an idea. So the vigilance is upon the creators. And, it might seem easy now, but, 10 years ago, we didn't have the iPhone. And now we've got people that are having mental health issues because they're addicted to their devices.
Mhm.
We didn't see that even in the first few years. So where this could go, I mean, it might sound like science fiction right now, but it's all, it's better to err on the side of impeccable character and intention in what we're building.
So first of all, I love that you worked Mars into your answer. That's just very cool. Second, I think you touched on a big thing, especially in healthcare. There's so much data that there's so much room for discussion. There's so much data, and I'm going to quote Dan since he decided to put it in chat. Definition of big data: whatever's too big to fit in Excel. I think that's a pretty good explanation.
It's pretty big.
Yeah. But Brian, what you just said, the ethical implications is also, I think it would be a whole nother great topic to dive into, but the ethical implications of the creator of AI to understand at what point there's a responsibility to make sure they haven't crossed the line. We talk about that in data collection, data privacy, and GDPR already, but I think you're spot on there. And that may be a session for another day. So thanks for bringing that up. I really appreciate that. And we will go much less on the creepy side. Michael, so one of my favorite quotes from, I know we talk about the tracking component all the time. Last year during Startup Week, one of my favorite statements was measure the activity that gets you the data that gets you the revenue. And there was a marketer on a panel and said, I believe what salespeople want from marketing is leads that are 100% ready to close. That's it. So in terms of the value of the solve, why is that so hard for a marketer to see in terms of the millions of ways people become, or the millions of customer journeys that become revenue? And then how is AI able to solve for that?
A very good question. And actually, piggybacking off some of Brian's points there, a lot of what one of the major problems is that marketers simply can't see very well, especially in a complex sales cycle, what's even happening end to end. They'll have different systems. They'll have their CRM and everything that goes on electronically and maybe some offline stuff. And so one of the very first things that we need to be able to do is to say, what is happening? Can we say from any particular page what the value of that is, or for a particular ad, who clicked it, exactly who, which opportunities it drove, what kind of revenue it's actually generated, what its ROAS is, or for anything else on there, kind of a complex query of what's actually happening. It's one of the major things that you need to do. It's kind of blocking and tackling. But that foundational level there, is necessary for all successful AI projects. And it is one of the reasons why at Click 360, we spent so much on just that foundational and started with that. So that's kind of number one. It's, can we see what's happening? We philosophically think that first-party data is going to be best. The idea there is, if you think about all the data that Google tracks and Google Analytics, they take that and of course they sell ads and everything else on that. It's what if you could get that, analyze it, and have it as your own and derive value from it. And so on its core there, we want to be able to see everything and we want companies to own that data. The second thing is then the complexity of that data. Despite the fun funnels and customer journeys and everything else that we have on those, for some customers, it's a very complex sales cycle. Some will extend months, some might even extend a year or so. And oftentimes it's more of a loop-de-loop maybe than a straight path on there.
Yeah. Okay.
So what we're really trying to do is to say, can we continuously learn this and then really adjust for that? Gary had a point there as well. We want to be able to do this extremely fast. And one of the reasons why we want to do it extremely fast, aside from taking action on it, is that if we're very efficient in the way that we track everything, that we measure everything, and that we can iterate over things, we can do a whole lot more thinking for effectively the same price, whether that's price and time or price and processing power or whatever else on those. And so we can give a lot more attention to each individual person in an automated way. But those are the two primary challenges that I think that companies face, marketers face on that, is what's happening, and then how do I understand this huge amount of data? If I can even get that data, how can I understand that? And so technical solves for both, but really need to have a firm understanding of the whole process on that, and then really learn from what your customers tell you.
Yeah. Yeah, very cool. And I love, first of all, the idea of the loop-de-loop. I mean, sometimes it takes a customer 3 or 4 or 5 different directions, 5 different channels, 5 different means, 5 different ads before they show up. And as a marketer, it can be daunting to see even the singular path that someone came by. Right? It's never singular. We're not singular beings. We're humans. We're all over the place. And so just being able to shed light on what's valuable, what's not, what's interesting, that piece. And that's, for the marketer, again, you've all said it, which I love. I think you said it organically, which is person plus insight creates outcome. This is not machine replaces human and go forth and conquer. And so we have about 20 minutes left. I threw some notes to the comments. If you guys have questions you want to ask, or something that's surfaced that you want to ask to the panel or somebody in specific, or if you want to talk about AI in your industry or even your own business, start queuing those up. I think I will, since we've touched on a lot of it, I think I'm going to jump to what I just sort of said, this idea of domain knowledge. So one of my favorite quotes, 80% of all processes currently run by humans that don't involve human-to-human contact are going to be run by AI. It's just kind of a fact, which allows humans to get back to what they're good at, which is being creative and being nice to each other. So I love both those things, being creative and being nice to each other. So it takes a lot of this anger out of doing a process by hand that doesn't need to be done that way without actually removing somebody's value to a business. What it does is it allows them to turn around and go, why was I hired? What do I do best? How do I get back to bringing actual value? And so to that piece of when AI removes the mundane, tedious process, what are the people in your industry freed up to do? That's the question I wrote down. So getting back to you. So as I've gotten to know Verrata over the year, I know you guys are creating massive wins around decreased time to approval, decreased paperwork, decreased losing patient data, expedited approvals, things of that nature. What does that free the hospital up for? What does that free that team up for? What does it free that person up for? And if there is a patient side of that, what does it free the patient up to do?
I think the first thing is that the patient gets care much faster with much less headache. And I think, for some of us, if we're not having a major health crisis, it's like a nice improvement in convenience. If you're a patient undergoing cancer treatments and you're anxious about when you're going to start chemo, your family is anxious, and somehow, you have stuff that has to wait for weeks with paperwork, you can imagine that type of anxiety actually really is actually harmful. So we've been excited to be able to really deliver those wins back to patients. But then there's, when you actually look at it, you know, earlier on when we started this conversation, I said about 60% of physicians have dedicated staff doing prior auths as their only job. And so when we take away that, you know, workload, they get to do stuff that's far more patient facing, right? They were in the back office, on the phone, faxing papers. Now that same staff member can be back towards supporting patients. They're often medical secretaries. They're also often front desk folks.
Yeah.
These are people who are picking up phone calls, and they deserve to be working with patients. And they were repurposed to do paperwork. And now we're able to kind of put them back to where I don't think anybody wants to healthcare saying I want to become an expert in insurance. And so people feel so liberated to be able to do that. But then the other thing I'll point out is that 40% of physicians don't have dedicated staff. And that meant that those physicians rely on either themselves, a physician assistant, or a nurse to do this type of paperwork. And that is a very expensive, talented resource spent calling insurance companies. And so at one hospital we work with thousands of providers now around the country, but at one, this really struck to me. There was a pain clinic where, as you know, pain is a major problem in the United States, major demand for pain services like injections, back pain. There was a clinic that was so bottlenecked with prior authorizations that their nurses were trying to get prior auths on behalf of the staff just so they could keep their clinic open because they couldn't bring in enough patients. Like, it was just too bottlenecked. And they ended up freeing 100% of their nurse hours away from prior auth. They just didn't need nurses to do that anymore. I mean, the nurses hated doing it. And it was so much better for the clinic. It was so much better for the nurses. And it certainly is a win for the patients to get those nurses back towards patient care. So when the hospital crunched the numbers, just amount of nurse dollars that they saved $21,000 per year in nurse time per nurse. So you think about how many nurses you might have across the entire practice or health system, right? That is millions of dollars that you can free up of a really valuable and short resources. So it's like, I think that's where technology can really create these huge, massive wins where it becomes a no-brainer to apply technology and get AI working on this.
You hit on 19 or 20 of my favorite points. Was you don't hire nurses to do paperwork. They're incredibly valued people who shouldn't be doing sort of these processes. And if you can just free them up to do what they got into medicine for, which is take care of patients, that's a win for the patient and the hospital and everyone in between. I love that answer. I'm going to frame that for later. Okay, Gary, what we've talked a lot about this idea of serving the right offer to the right person at the right time. So I'm going to frame this question a little differently for you is, what does the marketer get back in terms of when they do that right versus what do they lose when they're doing it wrong, when that offer shows up in the wrong inbox at the wrong time?
Yeah, that's a big one, right? I mean, let's think about marketing pain and where it's really consistent. We know on average 1 out of 3 digital campaigns fail. We don't always know why. So that's instantly, gut wrenching for some of us, right? Just knowing no matter what I do. So there's marketing waste, right? Which is a big issue. Overspending, underspending, not spending at the right time, whatever it is. I mean, frankly, having my background in television and digital advertising, so much is about timing, and it's the one thing we really can't control when it comes to customer journey. We just don't know where you're at. And so understanding that certainly is a big deal. So how do we reduce marketing waste? That's a big one, right?
Right.
Knowing that we want to create new ideas. We want to push new marketing tests out. We want those to be as effective as possible. However, we actually, if it's okay if they're going to fail, we just want them to fail fast. So a lot of times at Tuvio, we say aim small, bet small first, right? And when you think about really the shift that's occurred in marketing, there's a huge gap still today in the time it takes to iterate. Our cycles are so slow. I know for me, we were pushing hard to get in these 2-week mini sprint cycles with our clients, right? Really get them thinking about how do I stand up and tear down marketing as quickly as possible based on having enough quality of data to make a decision. And, really to Dan Analytics' comment a minute ago, talking about big data, that big data hype cycle is over now. Most organizations have the data, or at least know they need to have the data. Understanding the value, as Michael mentioned, of your first party data, what you can do to act on it is huge when you talk about a marketer's ability to create efficiency. So, after all, I think, at least why I got into marketing, right? Isn't it about iteration? Isn't it about learning and growing as fast as possible and iterating as much as you can? When I mentioned diversity a little earlier, diversity is a key component of marketing. Most of the time when we're doing split testing, right, we're creating maybe 3 a particular advertisement, testing that over time, and then maybe keeping, combining things based on performance.
Right.
Well, when you think about what AI can do, it's a little cheesy, but I love the analogy because it explains a lot. It's not A/B testing, it's A to Z testing, and it's in real time. So you need a system, right, that can read, that can analyze and help predict human behavior if you want to do that. It's just not possible for a human to physically do that at scale.
Yeah.
And one of the questions I saw in the panel, if I can just sneak a little bit of a sidebar into, Mike, about build versus buy, right? Many times organizations struggle to get to that point of delivering AI at scale, whether they build or buy, simply because they don't know what the right data is that they need to be able to act on. And so having a system that can actually mine that transactional data for you and say, bing, here's a moment that matters along a digital journey you may have not considered
Right.
In your human experience, is super valuable. And so that's about giving the time back and removing our need to do educated guesses and test slow, learn slow.
Right. Yep. Yeah, totally agree. And I mean, you and I and Michael and all the other guys in this space have that same conversation all the time, is, just being able to surface that moment. So we've got about 15 minutes left. Brian and Michael, I'm gonna throw these questions to you. I think we're gonna have a lot of the same conversations too, right? It's about giving time back to the patient. It's about giving time back to the marketer. But Brian, specifically to you, going back to nurse having 10, 20, 30 patients under their care, what do they get back? What can they provide in terms of value when they don't have to try to check in on every single person every 5 minutes, or when they can prioritize their time? Better patient care?
Sure. Look, yeah. So let's, like, for instance, in long-term care, approximately half of the patients or residents will experience depression at some point. And one of the best treatments for that is a non-pharmacological intervention called reminiscence. And so they come up with an individualized experience for the patients. It's maybe they liked baseball, so they'll get their family together and they'll watch a baseball game or something. And so it really frees them up to do personalized things like that. And when you think about what, as opposed to like the human care delivery, as opposed to the technological systems, like what does a human do really well? They give emotion and compassion and presence and love and energy for healing. And what does a machine do that, they don't really do that. They do things like computation or streamline documentation or take care of billing. So I think in terms of your question being, where does augmentation line stop and where does it become something potentially otherwise? And I think it's really in the strengths of what it is to be human. It's actually kind of a narrow band of consciousness that a human experiences and then is able to transmit to other people or other things. And so things outside that bandwidth, maybe should be left to other things instead of trying to transform humans into becoming those things. And so, even I'm sure companies you'll see in the news, especially in the next year or two, that are developing technologies that really blur those lines and have an agenda. I'm not sure if they know where it is or why it is that they're following that type of agenda, but safely on the side of just purely augmentation to have humans be good at what they're doing in terms of that experience, and trying to not make it into something that is unnatural.
I really like that. I'm trying to remember exactly what you said. You said transferring capabilities. Either way.
Say transmitting compassion or love to someone, like the human arcs. Think of the I think I just lost your audio there, Mike.
I'm back.
There we go.
Okay, Michael, and then I want to hit some questions from the panel, but this one I just love too much. So, I mean, we've been engaged with so many marketers who are getting, 70 to 80% of their resources back when they realize, and Gary touched on this, when they realize which things are turning to revenue, which behaviors are most valuable. What does that person get back when they get to go back to doing what they were doing, which is being a very intelligent domain knowledge marketer. And now they have 70-80% of their resources, their revenues back, and they can start to target that more efficiently and effectively.
Very good question. I mean, there's a number of things that you can look at immediately that you get back if you can save that, right? You're not wasting money. You're not wasting time. You're not annoying your customers or potential customers with things that they want. A whole host of things on that. But if you look at AI more broadly, it's effectively a part of this broader trend of basically automation. The difference is that it's semi-intelligent tasks. But, you go back to, I don't know, the invention of the automobile or the invention of tractors or anything else on this. And these things are all basically saving time, resources. You can reallocate these things. Certainly you save those. But what it really enables is this possibility. People are smart. If they're not wasting their time on things that are really not very valuable or could be automated, and they're very creative people, they're going to come up with things that we don't even have in mind. They're going to come up with new businesses. They're going to come up with new ways to engage people. And so it's really, that's what we're trying to go for with a lot of this stuff, is that give people their time back, give them their resources, let them use their intelligence, their knowledge, and everything else, and build something great, whether we know what that is right now or not.
I couldn't have said it any better myself. I mean, people are smart. We just give them their time back to do those things. The same as the patient care, when YiDing was mentioning, just nobody got into healthcare to do paperwork, right? Marketers didn't really get into marketing to try to, connect a bunch of dots, every day. They want to create cool messaging, cool marketing, engage. I've always said marketers want to engage everybody they can with a one-to-one meaningful conversation, right? And if you can get to that level, imagine what they can do. So we have about 8 minutes. I want to address some questions. Zach, hopefully Gary gave you some insight into the build versus buy. It's a conversation we have a lot. I will tell you from experience, it can be very hard and convoluted to build. But a lot of it has to start with, why do you want to build it? What process are you trying to solve for? And then is there something out there? It's a lot of what we're talking about today. Time versus domain knowledge. Do you want to build it yourself, or has somebody built it to a point where you can at least build off of it or leverage it? There's a lot of tools out there, but definitely hit us up if you want to know more about that. Andrea asks, where do you see AI currently being used well for teenagers learning? Do any of us have any competency on how we're using that at that level at this point? It may be that we don't have an expert in that specific area.
There are, I'm certainly not an expert in that area, but I think that there are incredible opportunities that we're seeing with some of even some of the tech companies around town, around Minneapolis, St. Paul, in the education space, of really trying to, how can we help people learn best? As far as like resources and that kind of stuff, of course, there's a Coursera, any number of things on there, Safari books online, anything, machine learning mastery. There's a huge amount of resources for people to get started on those. And Python is really pretty easy to pick up and start playing with these days. But I guess that question could go any one of those routes. But that being said, being able to express yourself is in terms a computer can understand and get things to work for you is hugely valuable. And from both working for people and starting up and just kind of taking your own ideas and getting them to work, it's very empowering, and it's just very satisfying as well. So great time to learn. I think I learned just before teenage years and started in there, and have just loved it ever since.
Yeah. And if you guys want follow-up questions, I'll put my email in chat before we all kick out here. But, if you want to follow up with one of the individual panelists with an individual question, or to learn more about what they're doing or why or how, hit me up on my email. I'll get you guys connected. I think Shalom's question is going to be for YiDing and Brian, and I'm sure you guys have already read it. But when it comes to health informatics, how efficiently and or accurate are the data harnessed without human observation? I'm guessing data points.
So happy to dive in first on that one. So I think it depends on kind of what type of data you're looking at, and you know how accurate it's going to depend on that. If you're measuring something that's very well measured against a gold standard, and there's a lot of not a lot of variation, so I think of this in either clinical metrics or sometimes financial metrics, then your accuracy should be quite good, especially if you have a sufficient amount of data, right? More data is always going to make your AI better. That said, I would say, like, from our standpoint of experience in reading clinical decisions as well as like clinical documentation, there's just extreme variation in how doctors take notes. I mean, it's just like we're all over the place. We have different types of acronyms, shorthand. And we've also realized is that the payers have they're not very consistent or precise in their own decision making, right? So a lot of times people feel like it's just like throwing stuff on the wall and seeing if it sticks. We've actually seen that payers are very inconsistent in how they actually grade something. And so if you have a neat kind of variation in your system, it's going to produce some noise. That said, it doesn't mean that your AI is not going to work, right? Because that's just the reality. That's what humans have to navigate today. And so you actually can design and build, we at Virata have built all of our AI. We're constantly hiring. So anybody and we're hiring across the entire organization. So anybody who's interested, we'd love to have you on board. But we're always dedicating our best engineers on how do you solve when you don't have an answer to whether somebody should get this chemotherapy. Usually is yes, but whenever there's a no, there's a million reasons why a patient might not qualify, and those types of variations are things that are just uncertain and where humans excel at. So we focus in on what we can answer yes, and we don't worry about understanding all of the outliers or the other exceptions, because that's what humans help manage. So we've kind of figured out how to design the AI to be able to work with probably a fairly messy data set.
Awesome answer. Brian, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, sure. I would say that the beginnings of Dr. Yu's comments were correct in terms of if you know exactly what data is being collected and everything, it's pretty straightforward. But maybe to what the question, as I interpret it, maybe alludes to is what are the human roles in terms of once we have these automated systems? And it still takes quite a bit. I mean, we're looking at a 2-week application launch, within for minor fixes and everything. So it's not like this perpetual motion machine where you build it once and then you can use it at infinite scale and you don't need anybody to watch it. It takes constant monitoring, and it's something that really has kind of a life of its own depending on what you're trying to do. I think the more advanced type of predictive things you're trying to look at, that's going to take a constant iteration. And I don't know if there's anything that would totally replace a team of engineers to maintain these things yet. Now it could be coming later on, but right now there's still a lot of manual, time-intensive work that goes into making these things seem like they are effortless. You get some kind of ratio feedback on your output depending on how sophisticated your solution is, but it's not like 1,000,000 times or something.
Yeah. So really quick, it is 1:29. I know there may be some other panels starting at 1:30. So if you have to jump, by all means. I want to get to Adam and John for anyone that can stick around a little bit. I'm going to bring Adam on the screen to ask his question if he's still there. But for everyone else, appreciate you stopping by. Hope you have a great rest of Startup Week. And again, my email is in chat if you want to ask questions of any of our esteemed colleagues on the panel today. I'm sure they'd be happy to share their insight or get in touch and answer anything else. So let's see if we can get Adam on screen here to ask his question. Or if he's not here, I will then move on to John's question real quick. But good panel so far. I'm really enjoying the conversation, the questions. I love the answers. I think couldn't have asked for a better set of responses today. So I appreciate you guys for showing up and helping delineate between AI and what's creepy and what's not and what's helpful. All right, so I don't see Adam coming, which may mean he's already gone. So let's get to John's question really quickly about most companies don't know what they need or even what is possible with their data and how AI can help them. As a data science consultant, how would you recommend finding the right decision makers that understand the macro level of their systems well enough to even understand what they want? I guess Gary and Michael have some feelings on that.
I can take the first thing if you want, Michael. I'm sure you'll have plenty to add. It's the big question, right? When it comes to finding the right partnership between a platform and between a set of data. And I'll probably sneak in just a little bit of my personal thoughts around CDPs because they're a big part of our mix. And a lot of folks are looking into customer data platforms to try to figure out what data is meaningful because they don't know what's valuable within what they have. So that is really the big question. And there's a big gap in the marketplace for data engineering right now. So that's where you find most of the issues with moving data through the different platforms. And so from a 2VO perspective, many times we're ingesting, data from 15 to 20 different low-level transactional sources, and then looking for patterns that are unique within those things to help figure out what might be meaningful to a marketer that they don't even know about yet. And that's usually one of the things that we try to address and something that a CDP really intends to do, but we're not seeing a ton of effective deployments there. We're not seeing a lot of ROI on those platforms yet. And so finding a lean system, and I think this goes back a little bit to build versus buy, right? Finding a lean system that's efficient, that's get in and start to understand what is meaningful within my transactional data. Then you can start asking the right questions. What do I do with it now? And I think that's right, the precipice of where we're at right now in the marketplace, which is really exciting to me because we're seeing a ton of validation from marketers who are asking those big questions and not easily finding those answers. So I know that was a bit roundabout way, but because we live more closely in data science than we actually do in marketing, we're trying to always understand what's meaningful in places where most people don't even know where to start digging.
Yeah, super cool. Michael, did you have anything you want to add on to that?
That was a very good answer. I think there's definitely the case there. Data engineering is fundamental for a data science project to be successful, I think. You need to have people who understand how they can actually build out a pipeline and hopefully a very flexible pipeline. We use a graph database on our back end rather than kind of relational databases or data warehouses. And what that allows us to do is to change the way we think about things, store things, process things in, a tenth of a second rather than a tenth of a year or whatever it takes for a kind of a data warehouse on there. But ultimately, you need people who understand the business as well. Generally, kind of how the data goes, some of the systems, but that business piece is critical for any data science project to succeed. You're going to have certainly the sponsors out there, but one of the things that I see, particularly at big companies, is people are making shiny objects that have no business value if they are successful. And oftentimes they can't run in real time and they can't do anything else on this. And that's a lot of fun and it's a great job if you can get it and do it for a while, but it's not really going to drive a whole lot. As a small company, you can't do that because, you starve to death or not have any money or whatever the thing is that you want on there. Find people who really understand the problem. If you can get that problem stated, you can say, okay, well, we might not have a full AI solution for this. Maybe the AI solution is a very small piece. Focus on that, do that part well, and just make sure it fits in with the big picture. That doesn't really answer it's more theoretical. It's not a specific talk to John over in accounting or whatever, but, that's kind of the process that I'd go through.
I think it's incredibly valuable. And I know you get asked questions like that a lot. I'm sure you all do, but I shouldn't say but, I should say and. I appreciate all of your answers today, and I want to give you all a chance to get back to your day. I only had you till 1:30, but thank you again for joining us on the demystification process that is harnessing the power of AI and improving business outcomes. Gary, YiDing, Michael, and Brian, thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your day. Everyone else, thank you for joining, and follow up with questions, and have a great rest of Startup Week.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thanks, Mike.